Welcome to Macon Memories. This is Lynda Wright, and today's February 25th, 2009. Today I'm here with Eloise Piccolo and Cathy Bach.
I'm Eloise Piccolo, and I started Randolph-Macon in September of 1942, which of course was the following year after Pearl Harbor. So we went through some difficult times and different times during my years at Randolph-Macon. Shortly after we started in September, the enrollment was probably 300 about that time, but the boys started joining and being drafted by the Selective Service, and they started dropping off like flies until actually by mid-year. So many of them had left to go to the service. The following year, I think due to the lack of student enrollment, Dr. Moreland had been trying to get some additional funds for the college, and he was able to get a unit of the Army Specialized Training Program, called the ASTP, to come to Randolph-Macon, and they had a station here. The headquarters was over at the old Commons Club building on College Avenue, and the boys attended. They were especially selected, I think, by some sort of test to be to be college material. And they went to classes. Some classes they attended with the civilian students, and some were taught entirely by the Army personnel, things that didn't concern the regular student body. They had wake-up call in the morning. They marched to classes, and it wasn't anything to look out of the window in our civilian classes and see a group of Army in uniform marching from class to class, and often singing when they marched. Then in the afternoon at 5 o'clock, they had retreat over at the athletic field, and it was just like on an Army base. They did the whole procedure just as though you were in a regular Army base. Attending those retreats almost every afternoon were quite a few college girls and town girls, and just even townspeople who were interested in watching. Afterwards, they were free until the following morning when they had reveille. So naturally, with the shortage of civilian men, we kind of took up with the Army men. And our families opened their homes to these boys, too. Like on weekends, we often had several of the boys down to eat. My mother would invite them for Sunday dinner. And we dated. They were no different from the boy next door, really, even though they had a reputation of being, Army, which you had to be careful of at that time. They were supposed to be careful of. That really, with that additional funds, took Randolph-Macon through the hard times and enabled it not to have to close its doors. As I said, some of the classes were attended by the civilians and the Army students. Those times where our classes consisted of no more than a dozen, sometimes even 5 or 6 students. I remember my Latin class under Dr. Bowen. Of course, Latin was not the prime class that people rushed to matriculate in, but Dr. Bowen had 2 students. I was one of them, and I think we did that for at least 2 years of Latin. Maybe the 3rd year was just the 2 students, and we met down in one of the little rooms in the library. The library at that time was Peel Hall, which I'm not sure what it's used for now. It's administration. Well, we went into the little cubicle, which was about 6 by 6, lined with Dr. Bowen sat in one, and the two students in the other. And we went through many and many a Latin session in there. Dr. Boyne later, a few years later after I graduated, he had the misfortune to be killed by one of the trains here. He was riding his bicycle and ran into the train. He was well into his 80s, still played tennis every day, and the joke was that if you played tennis with Dr. Boyne, you'd let him win so you could get a good grade in Latin. I never played tennis with him. Usually the boys did that. But he rode his bicycle from home over on College Avenue to class every day, and he would ride downtown. And one day a train came, and he just didn't see it. Was killed instantly. Most of the faculty, being an Ashland native, I had known most of my life, and they knew me. So our relationship was sometimes a strange one. We attended church together. Most of them went to the Methodist church. And we attended church. I had known them since I was a child. But then now I'm sitting in their classes, and it's a student-professor relationship. Let's see.
Cathy, tell us about what it was like when you came and there were a lot more women on campus, although still relatively few to the men.
Well, when I came, it was 1973, and the ratio was 4 men to every 1 woman. And well, one reason I came was basically because I really had a good feeling about Randolph-Macon, and I did like the fact that the classes would be small. And when I came, we did have 2 dorms that were devoted to the women. One we called New Dorm, which I understand is now Conrad, and the other was Mary Branch that faced the fountain. And we each dorm had its own resident. There was a little apartment for the woman to live, who was our dorm mother, and she, Mama J, was ours. And I distinctly remember Mama J, and she was, the person that was in control of who came in, what happened, and when you got in, because the doors would lock. Mm-hmm. We couldn't be out after a certain period of time, or the doors would lock, and then you'd have to have security come and unlock the doors, and you would be in trouble. And if we had gentlemen callers, then she would call up on the intercom to let you know that the gentleman caller was on his way up, and so that you would be aware. And I'm trying to think. So we were pretty controlled, I suppose you could say. Our classes were larger at that point. There was only about 800 people, though, when I came. It was smaller than the high school that I went to. So I would say that, in the classes, there'd be several women per class, but still it was a smaller number of women in the classroom. And we assimilated, and we got to know, of course, the guys on campus. I will say, I'll lead into a story in the fact that the guys here weren't used to having women living on campus. And they, for their parties, when they had fraternity parties, there were no sororities whatsoever. When there was the fraternity parties, they would go to Mary Washington. And actually, they brought girls down in a U-Haul to go to the fraternity parties. And, of course, then they went back. They stayed. I'm not sure where they stayed, to be real honest with you, but in homes?
In homes.
I
in
thought
Ashland,
so, yes.
Because my mother took some, had a family of my own. We took in college girls quite often.
Right. It was taking them a while to get used to socializing with the women on campus. And I think the best part for them was that they could see the girl that they were dating for the weekend and then go about their business during the week. So it's a little different when you're dating somebody and they're always there. So it was until after my freshman year that I really felt like that had become more of a flow and that we didn't see as many U-Hauls coming.
Did the male dorms also have dorm mothers, and was there the same protocol for women visiting their dorms as you were describing?
No. In fact, at that point, let me think. I can't think of what it was. Moreland dorm, which was across from us. No, they did not. But they still had the doors that would lock. They did have the doors that would lock. And the guys did not have any kind of supervision such as that. And, a lot of the guys lived down in the motel dorms, we called them, which were built, I think, after the men came back from the Army. Is that right, Eloise?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, to accommodate them. And we were told at that time that they were going to be temporary housing, that they were going to build other dorms down there, and they were considered, when they were built, to be temporary for the men returning from the war. So they did not have any supervision.
Many of those were apartments too that the married students returning from the war lived in.
And there was still one back there that was an apartment we had several students that were married when we were here, but other than that, and a lot of most of the guys that I knew lived in the motel dorms, as we called them. And I did too. After my freshman year, then they decided that the motel dorms some of them would be men and some of them would be women. So after my freshman year, I did live down in the motel dorms. And at that point, no, we did not have. It was only my freshman year that we had that dorm mother. After that, that stopped, and the door's still locked, though.
Of course, when I started in the early 40s, there were no resident girls, and that was early 70s, I think that started, right? 70 or 71?
It was 72. It was
72.
a class before me.
Okay. Because we were allowed to attend Randolph-Macon if we were residents of Hanover County, and we were allowed to attend as day students. Of course, there were no dorm facilities at all for us. We lived at home, and we traveled back and forth. I rode my bicycle to 8 o'clock class many a morning.
That's great.
During the war years, when the male population you were describing had dwindled so much at the college, did a lot of women take up that opportunity, and did the college become, a predominantly female college at that time, or not?
As well as I remember, I think our top enrollment for girls at any one time was about 12. No, not any extraordinary number at all. About 12, and a lot of them stayed 1 year, or maybe 2 or 3 semesters, and did not graduate. There were 3 of us, as I remember, who started as freshmen and went through and graduated, after the 4 years. I myself graduated in 45 because during the war, Randolph-Macon decided to open summer school to accommodate some of the boys who were coming and going to the service, and just to keep the college open all the time to recognize as much revenue as they could. I went 2 summers and therefore took up, doubled up on my hour load too, class load, and graduated in August of 45. So that was me at that time too.
in August of 45. I don't know if you can remember if your graduation was before or after the end of the war and what the response was on campus to all the events in August of 45.
I do remember our graduation, so much different from what it is now, but we only had 5 graduate at the time when I graduated. And our graduation was held at church services on Sunday, I can't remember the date, but it was just about the time of, the armistice had been signed. So the war was very much a part of my college years. In fact, it encompassed the whole time I was in college, ended about the same time I graduated. But yes, Duncan Memorial Methodist Church at that time was on the second floor of the Duncan Memorial building. I don't know whether you have another name for that now or not. The chapel, the old chapel. Yeah, old chapel. Downstairs was where chapel was held, which was compulsory chapel. We had to attend chapel twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 o'clock. And it was not always, in fact, it was very seldom a religious service, but it was announcements, and it was just the way that the student body had to get together, because we didn't have any student center or Blackwell Auditorium or any of those buildings that came along later. But that was the time that professors made their announcements or talked about what was necessary, predominant on campus. And sometimes we had a program, maybe a pianist or a musical trio, something that would entertain you. But we had a half-hour compulsory chapel, and if you had so many cuts, I think it was 3 cuts, it was the same as 1 class cut.
That's interesting. Because when I was here, the old chapel, that downstairs where you had chapel was the theater.
Oh, it was.
It was the theater. It was the theater for the college, and that's where we went to see the plays that the college put on. And upstairs were the art classrooms for and a music class. I took a music class up there. That's where the music room was, in the upstairs of the old chapel.
Well, after the present Duncan Memorial Church was built, of course, the upstairs. In fact, that's where I was married, upstairs.
Are
in
you
the old
kidding?
chapel. Mm-hmm.
How wonderful!
Yes, I was married there. So that was 49.
Yeah. So.
And did you meet your husband at Randolph-Macon?
Yes.
Was he a student? You would like to tell us about that.
Yes, I did. I had, of course, our main entertainment was fraternity parties on Saturday night. I mean, all the fraternities were still open at that time, and even though they were being dwindling down quite a bit in enrollment, but they always had their parties, and we would, depending on who we were dating at the time, we'd go to that fraternity house, and then usually maybe drop around at 1 or 2 other fraternity houses on Saturday night, but that was our main entertainment. And, of course, sometimes they got a little bit in trouble for being a little too raucous, or one of the boys misbehaved a little bit, and he was brought up on the carpet, but
probably not as much as they misbehaved when I was there.
Nothing to where what we call misbehaving at that time was probably having 1 beer too many, and making a sort of a fool of himself. But for the most part, everybody was well behaved and respected the girls very much. There was an occasional incident that was tried to be swept under the rug, but for the most part, they treated us well and, respected the girls to the nth degree.
I agree with Eloise, and not much changed by the time that I was there. I mean, the fraternities were still the social life of the campus, and that's what every fraternity had a party every weekend. But and if there was more than one, we would kind of go around to the other fraternities. Our social life on campus was on campus. We didn't go into Richmond. I mean, that was very rare. There'd have to be something very special to go into Richmond, something, to see a play or something along that nature. But generally speaking, we entertained ourselves here on campus. And no cars were, I mean, I'm sure when Eloise was here, there weren't any cars, basically. But when I was here, it was unusual for someone to have a car.
Right.
What about the entertainment that you came up with?
The entertainment, as I said, we did have to entertain ourselves. And at that time, when I started here, in that January is when streaking became very popular in the country. And we had a heat wave of all things in January, and everybody would know this would happen. It was a lot of fun because everybody would kind of put their books aside, say about 8 o'clock at night, and they'd gather in the back of where New Dorm and Moreland and the back of Mary Branch, and be ready because we knew somebody would come streaking across that quadrant of the college, and they would have a brown paper bag on their head, and we did have both male and female streakers. So that really joined the campus together, I would say, more than anything else. And it was basically a lot of fun. It kind of united us, yeah.
Well, we were quite a bit before the streakers, but in talking about the fraternity parties on Saturday night, the event on campus each year was the Panhellenic dances. In the spring, I think they were usually around March, and all of the fraternities would join together, and there would be a huge dance. And I mean, we had name bands. I mean, they would pay just an enormous amount of money in that day, to have these bands. I know Tex Beneke came one time.
Wow.
I wish I could remember, because this thought just occurred to me, and I can't remember. I can see some of the others. I can't in my mind, but I can't call their names right now. But these were semi-nationally popular bands. And, of course, Tex Beneke became more popular after Glenn Miller was lost, in the war. He took over his band. But Tex Beneke played for Glenn Miller for quite a few years before the Glenn Miller band was disbanded. But Tex Beneke and one more that I really can't remember, but he was a very well-known band leader. But we dressed up in our long gowns. There was a receiving line of all the powers that be of the college, and this was approved by the faculty and the administration, too. But it was a big deal. That was our big deal.
That's really interesting. Yeah. That sounds really nice.
In my yearbook, it has a section on Panhellenic Council.
And we did not have that, but we did do our own. We decided that we'd have our own dress-up parties. The girls, of course, initiated this. And that was nice. Just within our dorm area, we would do that, and that was nice. Yeah. But no, we did not have
That had started before I entered college, because I remember in high school I would hear about the Panhells. They were, and if you ever got a college boy to invite you to a Panhell dance, you were in. Of course, my mother didn't allow me to date college students when I was in high school, so it never came to me. Until I was in college, I went to them here with other students.
We did attend Camptown races.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
so
we did. So that, my freshman year, I distinctly remember going out to Camptowns and participating in that. And actually having friends came down for the Camptown races. And That was a big weekend on campus when
Yes.
Camptown Races was a big weekend for us. Yeah.
Of course, those large dances disappeared, when the war came. Most of that, I think, I'm remembering from my freshman year, because my freshman year, things were still going along. We were still kind of in awe of being at war, and it hadn't really struck us full force here. So we were going along on campus just about as before, and they were the real frills and the big college bands and so forth. By the time the next year rolled around, and people were tightening their belts and being a little more frugal, all the frills kind of disappeared.
What I think is interesting, Eloise, is that you were here during World War II, and I was here. The Vietnam War was still going on,
That's right.
and actually, I can remember being in a guy's dorm, and they were watching TV to see if their name would be drawn as to whether they
As selective service,
yes,
yeah.
had to go to Vietnam. I wouldn't say that it was still involved in protest, against the war as much. Of course, there's people on campus who were against the war and people that were for the war, et cetera, but it wasn't as much of an issue as basically worrying about whether, somebody you knew would be drafted. Yeah. And, yeah. So it had its effect on the campus, too. In a different sort of way. The protest that we had was more about visitation, because this was the new generation. We felt like we could govern ourselves as far as our social life, and so we did have protests, and we marched over to President Luther White's house. On College Avenue, and we stood outside with our candles, and then we had a sit-in at Mary Branch, and we sat around and played cards and hung out there, so that we were going past the curfew time. So that was our major protest, and I guess it worked, because the next year things were a little more relaxed along that line. Yeah.
I was just going to say one more thing about the small enrollments. After the war started and so many of the boys were drafted, our classes dwindled, and as I said, some classes were just 5 or 6 students. I do remember my physics class, which was over in the, what is now the Flippo Armistead Art Building. Pace Armistead, that's right. But that was the building that my, most of the sciences, chemistry and biology and physics, were held. And my physics class was in an upstairs classroom, and it was practically filled. I bet there were probably 25, 30 students, almost the entire enrollment of the college at one time. But Dr. Keeble was physics professor, and Mr. McNeil, who was also treasurer of the college and held I think he wore a few other hats too, but he was also assistant physics professor. During that time, we had a very small faculty, and the offices, at one time, Dr. Hatcher was vice president, secretary, and treasurer.
Oh, my goodness.
And that was Gertie Sloan's father. And he was vice president when I entered. Dr. Moreland was president. He had come here in 1939, I believe, and I entered in 1942. And he was president. His 4 girls, or its 2 older girls particularly, were my generation and my friends in class at high school with me. They went away to Randolph-Macon Women's College, and I attended here mainly. But it was it was affordable to my family, and it was also an excellent college, so couldn't beat that combination. And I could live at home, which of course I miss so much in the dorm college life.
Right.
But we had, with the fraternity houses, the only fraternity who had a house mother was the KA house. And Mrs. Hamner, Lula Hamner, was house mother there. She had her bedroom just as you came in the side door. You'd always stop and speak to Miss Lula when you came to a party there on Saturday night. And those boys ate at the house, and they just lived completely at the house. That was a really, really well-run fraternity at that time.
Was there a cafeteria?
No cafeteria.
Right.
The boys ate in boarding houses.
Okay.
They had Miss Mary Blackwell, Mrs. Wagner were two of the main boarding houses, and they fed the boys. Sometimes faculty members, too, if they wanted to come. But it was home-style cooking.
So they lived close to campus?
Yes, those houses were within 2 or 3 blocks of campus. Mm-hmm.
I think that's really interesting.
They're not standing now. Miss Mary Blackwell's house was right where the Bank of America is now, but facing the other street. So the boys only had like 1 or 2 blocks to walk. And Mrs. Wagner was on College Avenue up near where one of those large fraternity houses, I can't think, SAEs probably, yes.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't. Would they eat three meals a day at the boarding house?
It depended on, I think, the contract that they had with her, but she would feed 3 meals a day. Yes.
That's real. I think that's really
and
interesting.
I imagine a lot of them only contracted for 2 meals, but no cafeteria.
We had a cafeteria, but it's now considered, I think, space for the athletic department.
Yeah.
It was right across from the gym,
yeah.
And our gym was we thought it was the new gym, Crenshaw. It was right across from there. It's just that it's still there. The building is still there. And we did not have, of course, the student center until it was my, I guess maybe it was my sophomore year. I worked over there for a little while in the student center, but that was being built, and there's still the little campus CX, yes, that's what it was. The little CX was still there.
Campus Exchange.
Yeah. And behind New Dorm, there was the old science building. That's what I thought was interesting when you said physics was over where the art.
Where the art building is now.
Yeah, because that science building was right there, and that, of course, was done away with, and we were real upset when they decided to get rid of the old gym also, because that was one of the oldest gyms.
Yeah,
I'm sure Eloise remembers that, and that gym, they decided to take that down too, and we had our little mailboxes over there, and I regret to this day that I didn't save my mailbox when they decided not to use them anymore, but I still use that number for various, if I have to remember a number for something, that's the number, 1239.
That is amazing.
And, it changed while I was here. A lot of things changed while I was here. But the gym at that point, Crenshaw was new, and then the old gym was on the other side of it. They just added Crenshaw to the side of the older gym, and anyway, it was it's kind of interesting to see it change. And the library was not this library at all. It was just it's part of this library now. This was added onto later on, and when I was here, it was just a simple 2-story building. I was at the circulation desk, and I did work under Flavia Owen, and it was a great experience. because just like at the library I work at now, you're almost like a bartender. People come up to the desk and they start talking to you and they're telling you stories, etc. So it was a really nice way to be involved with the college itself. And one of the things that stands out about that library in particular was that, and I wasn't there, but it was my freshman year, one of our students went on to become a Marine SEAL. So he was very sturdy, athletic, strong. And he jumped off the balcony in the library. And Mark was fine. He was fine. And then, I'll say his name, Bill Lahaki, he decided that he could do that too. And poor Bill, both his legs were broken. He had to go around in a wheelchair for a while. But that's what happened. And it's amazing to think that could actually take place. But it did. It did.
Now, that library that you remember
Yeah.
was not here at all. All that section of Henry Street now, from where Duncan Memorial Church is all the way down to the athletic field, was lined with homes.
Oh.
And those houses, of course, were torn down. And even on the side across the street where the student lounge and, the fountain and all, they were homes too. And faculty lived in most of those homes. Dr. Bullington of the biology department lived there. Even Hugh Stevens, Hugh and Catherine, no, wait a minute, not Hugh. Paul and Carolyn Severin, when they came, as he was coach, football coach, and they lived over there. Dr. and Mrs. Keeble lived there, but it was mostly faculty homes.
So the fountain wasn't there?
Oh, no,
then?
no, the fountain.
See, that was one of the things that actually drew me to the
Was it?
to
No.
the college.
No, and the I think I may have mentioned Peel Hall as having been the library. Upstairs, you had to go upstairs to the desk and to the library. And Mrs. Haley, who was the wife of Dr. Joe Haley, the German and Greek professor, Mrs. Haley was the librarian from as long as I can remember until my freshman year. And she still continued, but she brought in a young lady from Alabama named Flavia Reed, she was at the time. Flavia was not married then, but she did find a local boy, and she married Ted Owen, who was an Ashland boy. And she stayed here from 1942, until, I don't know her retirement date, but it was many, many years. 1984. Okay, she stayed here about 42 years then.
And Eloise, I'm curious. I mean, your husband, you did meet him here?
Yes, he had been in the Air Corps and a bombardier, and a very good friend of a student who had come down. He was from New Jersey, and Bob Herzog had come down from New Jersey to Randolph-Macon after the war. And they had grown up together, and he had written to my husband, and he said, "You've just got to come down to college," because the GI Bill was going on then. And Pickett, my husband, had started at Rutgers up in New Jersey, but did not want to go back there. So Bob enticed him to come to Randolph-Macon, and he came down in the middle of the winter and started in the January term. And I often heard him say, if Bob had not been there at the train station, which is the present train station, and he got off the train, if Bob had not been there, he would have gotten on the train and gone on back to New York or wherever the train went. It was snow, it was cold, the campus had no leaves on the trees, and it really was not an attractive campus at that time. Nothing stood out but Hall. You could see Wash Frank Hall, the old chapel, but they were just those original core of buildings.
Right.
And with the snow and no leaves, nothing to attract him, he said he just got a terrible feeling. Maybe I've made a mistake. But he did get off, and he and Bob continued to be friends. Bob still lives. He and his wife raise horses up in the Beaver Dam area, and he was headmaster at St. Christopher's for quite a while, and I see him occasionally, but he, like myself, sometimes the years have taken a toll.
Did you marry while you were here in college? Or
No,
after?
no, I had graduated. He stayed here and at Randolph-Macon, and then he went to MCV Pharmacy School.
Right.
And so we married in between Randolph-Macon and MCV, a pharmacy school, and that was 1949. So I say I imported my husband. But, quite a few New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York boys came to Randolph-Macon.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yeah,
that was still
awful
interesting when I was here. There was that
awful lot from that area. And I don't know whether it was word of mouth or whether just what prompted them to come to a small southern college. But we had
And my best
majority.
friend was from Baltimore. We had a few, quite a few from the Baltimore
Is that
area
right?
too. Yeah, she grew up in Baltimore, and she was the resident advisor, I guess, on my hall when I started. But I met my husband here also, but he had graduated before we started to date because he was working for the food service. That's why I was interested in the cafeteria.
Oh, okay.
He worked for the food service that we had here, and that's what he made his career in, was college food services. So, and he was the food service director at Randolph-Macon Women's College for a while also. So,
that.
yeah, so,
Interesting.
yeah.
No, I had been friends with Bob, and so one of those fraternity parties, on a Saturday night, he said, he had told my husband, he says, I know this little town girl that I think you would probably enjoy dating. Because Bob and I had just a friendship relationship, and so he set me up with Pick, and from then on, we just were a twosome.
Yeah. I knew John. I want to say that one of the best parts of going to Randolph-Macon for me, my sister went to Virginia Tech, and I looked at Virginia Tech. And at that point, as far as financially, what I got, the money I got to be able to come to Randolph-Macon, it matched. At that point, I could have gone to either one, but I had that much support because my parents didn't have a lot of money. But anyway, I love the fact that when I graduated, I had such a wide range of friends here, and that you knew everybody. I mean, almost everybody. Right. I know it was almost 800. I'm sure it was even more so for Eloise. And so you had this connected bond that I know people that go to larger schools don't really have. They tend to know just the people, say, in their fraternity or whatever. Yeah, but here, right. you knew everybody. And it was easy to become involved. I got involved in the student government, and I was senior class president, and just really involved in different things in the campus, because it was just such a
it was
convivial.
Natural.
Yeah, it was natural to be able to do that. Yeah.
That is one of the great things about Randolph-Macon, and the connections people make. I hear that over and over in these interviews. Well, before we finish, I would like to hear if you have any memories or stories or anything about Flavia. I know you probably knew her in town, Eloise, a member of the Women's Club for many years. And Cathy, you said you worked for her. So I was just wondering if you had could sum up her personality or just describe her or anything about Flavia.
Flavia was a wonderful person. I'm sure, I don't know from the end of being a competent a librarian, but I'm sure she was. I knew her mostly as a neighbor. I lived just a block from her. And she and her family, and she raised her family in that house, and Now her son and his wife and children live in it. So I can't think of anything else really. Yeah.
I did not know her personally. Just like say from the Washington Literary Society,
Right.
she helped out with that. I was an English major, so that was something that I was involved with, and she was friends of the Watsons, so I knew her from that aspect as far as the English connection there, and working with her. I didn't see her that much. I was at the circulation desk, and we had a separate person who ran that. But she was always just very, very warm and friendly when she would, when you would approach her or talk to her. And
a lot of fun too. She had a really
right.
a unique sense of humor.
Mm-hmm. My friend Arthur Staples probably knew her better. He worked in the archives department of the library at that point, and he actually was the nephew of the Chaplain Gibson, when we were here. Yeah.
Any final thoughts on your time here? Any other memories?
One thing came to mind just a few minutes ago. In my English class with Dr. Stanford Webb, Dr. Webb was, and one more thing I must remember to say too, but I'll think of that after I tell you this. One of the favorite, he was just one of the smartest men and very, very nice, and he had a cute sense of humor too. But I will say sometimes his classes were a little boring. And so one of our favorite pastimes was to count the number of times that he paced up and down from one side of the room to the other. And he would always stop when a freight train would come by, because that class was held. See, we had very few class buildings. That was held on, in also the Pace Armistead upstairs. And he would pace back and forth and back and forth. And I forget how many was my top number, but we counted those paces. Now, his wife, he had married a local lady. They married quite late in life. She was Pearl Woolfolk. And there is a painting, I think it's in upstairs in the dining hall, of Dr. and Mrs. Webb sitting at a table. It's a very light, pretty, uplifting picture. They're sitting at a table having breakfast or tea or something. But Mrs. Webb, and they never had any children. As I said, they married probably middle age at least in life. We had to have at one point with all the girls here, even though they were few in number, we had to have some sort of supervision. So she was the headmistress of the little house that they had given over to the girls to, if you had an hour or two between classes, you could.
Nice.
It was one of the old fraternities that had closed during the war, and it was the old Phi Cap house, which was a wooden house on campus at the time, not Phi Cap. Lambda Chi house, maybe. Anyway, it was one of those three fraternity houses there. And we called it the skirt barn because obvious reasons. And we could go there in between classes, or if we just wanted to, if we weren't feeling well, to go just lie down on the sofa for a little while, or had a headache, or if we wanted to study. And so that was our little refuge. The only place we had to gather, because there was no central gathering place for any students. I mean, the boys had their fraternity houses, and we had the skirt.
When I came, they were still working out a lot of different how to assimilate the women into the college. And B.J. Seymour, with whom I have a lot of respect for, she was made dean of the women, and she was a religion professor here, but that was her role, and she did a wonderful job in that position, just guiding and working with the women if there was any problems, etc. So, yeah. And the buildings themselves, I am proud of the fact that our class, we worked very hard to renew interest in restoring Wash Frank Hall, which has been done. And one of my classmates, our gift to the college that year was the painting that we had done, that she had done, Rebecca Bowles over at, works in the bookstore now. She did that painting, and eventually, I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to generate interest in raising funds to restore the building. So, anyway.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I did not mention was, due to the small number in the classes, oftentimes the professors would take us outside and we'd hold class under a tree.
Oh, that's nice.
Especially the biology classes were held outside. But we would you'd find a professor out there sitting. We'd all be sitting on the ground, And,
that's so idyllic.
I know.
But, the academic village, that's really great. I will say that in the spring, because that made me think of spring, and that was basically the favorite time to be here at Randolph-Macon. And we had a co-ed softball team, and that was really fun to play softball. And that was another way that we kind of became part of the campus as that type of thing. And just watching baseball and soccer, it was all very much fun in the springtime. We had, just like they did, it sounds like we had colloquy, we called it, in January, what they call Jan term now. But I know after I graduated, they switched it to May one year, and that just didn't work out too well because it was just so beautiful here in the spring. Yeah.
No, we didn't have a separate January term. We just went.
Oh, you didn't have that?
No, we did not have a separate J term. We went till... I never did understand why we came back after Christmas vacation at all, because it was just about 2 weeks. And I think our second semester started around January the 15th. So, no, we just had the 2 semesters. And as a freshman, I had gotten some small scholarship. And as a freshman, I know tuition was $90 per semester.
Oh, my goodness.
$90 per semester.
That's an amazing memory, and I can see why you remember that. Yes.
There's one memory that I forgot to share when I was talking earlier that in our conversation just now just came up, and that is the connection between Ashland and Randolph-Macon while I was here in the beginning of the middle of the 70s, and we did have what we call colloquy, which they call Jan term now. My class was a mural class that Tom Porter, who is still a professor here, he was the instructor for the class, and we did a mural, which is still, I'm so proud to say, on the wall in Fox, and it should stay there forever, may I add. It was a wonderful experience. And one of the best parts about the experience was the fact that we had to plan the mural. We had to get what we needed to use as far as paints, etc., for the mural. And I will never forget going over to Meade and Company, which was on the Railroad Avenue at that point, and talking to Meade Jones and his great generosity in helping us out in doing the mural. And he came when we had the opening of the mural, etc. And it just it made Ashland seem so special to me, the way that business owner worked with us.
Thank you, Eloise and Cathy, so much for sharing your memories today, the Macon Memories.